need to get inside. It's urgent.
Ma'am, this is a restricted area.
Step aside. Warehouse duty. Marcus Sterling's harsh voice sliced through the dawn mist as he shouldered past the petite woman clutching her weathered duffel bag. She stumbled, her worn sneakers sliding on the wet asphalt of the Special Forces training compound. But she didn't collapse, just regained her footing with the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to being overlooked. The other recruits snickered, that cruel laughter that echoes through every elite facility where pride runs unchecked. Here was their morning amusement. A woman who appeared to have wandered in from a gas station job, standing among the hand-picked candidates of one of the most exclusive programs on the continent. Seriously, did security fall asleep? Victoria Hayes flipped her platinum blonde hair and pointed at the woman's faded hoodie and cracked sneakers. This isn't a homeless shelter. The woman, Sarah Chen, according to the intake files, remained silent. She simply retrieved her bag with those measured, careful movements and headed toward the dormitories. Her silence only fueled their mockery. But in precisely 15 minutes, when that worn jacket revealed what lay hidden beneath, every person in that courtyard would realize they had committed the gravest error of their military lives. The general himself would stop mid-stride, his complexion turning ashen as he recognized a marking that wasn't supposed to exist in active service. A marking that would alter everything. If this tale of concealed identity and military honor has captured your attention, please hit that subscribe button for more extraordinary stories. Trust me, what unfolds for Sarah in the coming moments will convince you that sometimes the most formidable warrior in the room is the one everyone dismisses. Now, let's return to that training ground where destiny was about to reveal itself. Sarah Chen had arrived at the Special Forces compound in a rusted sedan that appeared ready for the scrapyard. The paint was peeling, the bumper held on by zip ties, and mud from forgotten rural roads coated every surface. When she emerged, everything about her suggested ordinary. Her cargo pants were wrinkled, her jacket had faded to an uncertain brown, and her canvas shoes had tears that let the morning moisture seep through to her socks. No one would have suspected she descended from one of the most influential military families in the nation. Raised in a world of private academies and secure compounds, but Sarah didn't carry that heritage with her. No brand names, no polished appearance, just an unremarkable face and clothing that looked thrift store purchased. Her duffel bag was secured with duct tape, and her shoes were so scuffed they might have belonged to a street performer. But it wasn't merely her appearance that distinguished her. It was her stillness. The way she stood with her arms crossed, observing the compound's chaos like she was waiting for a cue only she could recognize. While other recruits strutted and posed, sizing each other up with the aggressive confidence of youth and entitlement, Sarah simply watched. The first day was engineered to be a trial by fire. Sergeant Major Thompson, the chief instructor, was a towering figure with a voice that could silence a riot and arms that looked forged from steel. He stalked the courtyard, evaluating the recruits with the predatory focus of a hawk selecting targets. "You," he barked, jabbing a finger at Sarah. "What's your story?" "Maintenance crew lost." The group chuckled. Victoria Hayes, with her razor-sharp blonde bob and a grin that never touched her eyes, whispered to the recruit beside her loudly enough for all to hear. "Bet she's here to fill a quota, diversity hire, right?" Sarah didn't flinch. She looked at Sergeant Major Thompson, her expression calm as a mountain lake, and said, "I'm a recruit, sir." Thompson scoffed, dismissing her like a bothersome fly. "Get in formation then. Don't hold us back." The evening meal that first night was a war zone of egos and testosterone. Sarah carried her tray to a corner table distant from the boisterous chatter and competitive bragging. The hall buzzed with recruits trading stories of their achievements, their voices escalating as they attempted to one-up each other. Ryan Park, lean and arrogant with a military cut that seemed to come with an attitude, noticed her sitting isolated. He grabbed his tray and swaggered over, dropping it on her table with a deliberate crash that made nearby tables turn to witness the spectacle. "Hey, charity case," he said, his voice perfectly pitched to carry across the room. "This isn't a food bank. You sure you're not here to mop floors?" The crowd behind him erupted in laughter. Sarah paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth, and regarded him with those steady dark eyes. "I'm eating," she said simply. Ryan leaned closer, smirking. "Yeah, well, eat faster. You're occupying space real warriors need." Without warning, he knocked her tray, sending a glob of gravy splashing across her shirt. The room roared with laughter. Phones appeared, capturing the humiliation for social media fame. But Sarah just reached for her napkin, cleaned the mess with slow, methodical motions, and took another bite like Ryan wasn't even present. The deliberate composure of her response seemed to anger him more than any retort could have. Physical conditioning the following morning was an endurance test designed to separate the committed from the pretenders. Push-ups until muscles screamed. Sprints that seared lungs. Burpees in the dirt under a scorching sun. Sarah maintained steady, controlled breathing, but her shoelaces kept coming undone. They were old and frayed, barely keeping her shoes intact. During a sprint, Marcus Sterling jogged alongside her. Marcus was the group's star, broad-chested with a smile that proclaimed he'd never failed at anything and had no intention of starting now. "Yo, thrift shop," he called out loud enough for the entire formation to hear. "Your shoes surrendering, or is that just you?" Laughter rippled through the group like a current. Sarah didn't respond. She simply knelt, retied her laces with quick, precise movements and stood. But as she rose, Marcus bumped her shoulder hard enough to send her staggering. Her hands struck the mud, knees sinking into the wet earth. The group howled with delight. "What's that, Chen?" Marcus said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "You volunteering to scrub the floors or just planning to be our personal target?" Sarah stood, wiped her muddy hands on her pants, and resumed running without a word. The laughter followed her for the remainder of the morning, but if it affected her, she showed no sign. During a break, she sat on a metal bench, pulling a protein bar from her bag. Victoria sauntered over with two other recruits, her arms folded, her voice sticky with false sympathy. "Sarah, right? So, where are you even from? Did you win some lottery to be here?" Her companions giggled, one covering her mouth like it was too amusing to contain. Sarah took a bite, chewed slowly, and looked up. "I applied." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, like she was stating the time. Victoria's smile tightened. "Okay, but why?" she pressed, leaning in. "You don't exactly scream elite operator. I mean, look at your everything." She waved a dismissive hand at Sarah's muddy hoodie and plain brown hair. Sarah set her protein bar down and leaned forward just enough to make Victoria step back. "I'm here to train," she said quietly. "Not to validate your insecurities." Victoria froze, her cheeks flushing. "Whatever," she muttered, turning away. "Freak." The orienteering exercise that afternoon was designed to be particularly brutal. Recruits had to navigate a mountainous terrain, compass in hand, under a strict time constraint. Survival of the fittest, military edition. Sarah moved alone through the rocky landscape, her compass steady, her steps silent on the loose stones. A group of 4 recruits led by Jake Martinez spotted her checking her compass near a large boulder. Jake was wiry and hungry for recognition, the type who had been competing with Marcus for alpha status since day one, and saw Sarah as an easy target to impress his followers. "Hey, Girl Scout," he called, his voice cutting through the mountain air. "You lost already, or you just out here collecting rocks?" His group laughed, closing in like predators sensing weakness. Sarah folded her compass with deliberate fingers and continued walking. But Jake wasn't finished performing for his audience. He jogged up and snatched the compass from her hands. "Let's see how you do without this," he said, hurling it down the rocky slope with theatrical flair. The others cheered. Sarah stopped, her eyes tracking the compass as it bounced and disappeared among the rocks. She looked at Jake, her face completely neutral, and said, "Hope you remember the way back." Then she turned and kept moving, her pace unchanged, like losing the compass was merely another minor setback. Jake's laughter wavered, but his group continued jeering, their voices echoing off the mountain walls. Sarah carefully secured her personal equipment in the reinforced storage locker, including her encrypted communication device featuring cutting-edge military-grade technology with global positioning capabilities. The hardened tablet she stored alongside had been engineered specifically for extreme operational conditions, its reinforced display capable of withstanding combat environments that would completely destroy standard civilian electronics used by the other recruits around her. The weapon breakdown drill came that afternoon, and it was designed to be the ultimate test. Every recruit had exactly 90 seconds to completely disassemble an assault rifle, clean it thoroughly, and reassemble it to military standards. Most of them struggled, their fingers fumbling with the components, cursing under their breath as pieces slipped from nervous hands. Marcus finished in a sloppy 1 minute 28 seconds, grinning like he'd just conquered a mountain. Victoria barely made it at 1:29, her hands trembling as she clicked the final piece into place. Then Sarah stepped up to the table. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. Her hands moved like they were following a choreography written in muscle memory. Component out, bolt free, parts arranged in a perfect pattern with surgical precision. 45 seconds. Not a single error, not a moment's uncertainty. Staff Sergeant Rivera, the weathered instructor overseeing the drill, stared at the timer, then at her, then back at the timer like it might be malfunctioning. "Chen," he said, his voice low and contemplative. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Sarah wiped her hands on her pants and stepped back. "Practice," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. The display screen behind them showed a slow-motion replay of her performance. Every movement clean and efficient, not a single wasted motion. A captain nearby leaned over to Staff Sergeant Rivera, his voice carrying just far enough for others to hear. "Her hands never wavered once. That's special operations steady." Marcus overheard and scoffed loudly. "So she can strip a rifle," he said, making sure Sarah could hear every word. "Doesn't mean she can fight." But during the break that followed, a quiet recruit named Maria Rodriguez, who'd been observing Sarah closely, slipped her a spare compass from her own kit. "You'll need this," Maria whispered, her eyes darting around to ensure no one witnessed the exchange. Sarah took it, nodded once, and tucked it into her bag without a word. It was the first gesture of kindness she'd received since arriving, and though her expression didn't change, something flickered in her eyes. Whispers began after that weapons drill. A few recruits started glancing at her during breaks, trying to solve this puzzle of a woman who dressed like a vagrant but handled firearms like a professional. Sarah didn't seem to notice or care. She sat on the concrete during rest periods, methodically retying her shoelaces, her face as unreadable as ever. Victoria leaned over to Marcus, her voice low but sharp with malice. "Bet she's got some sob story. Poor kid from nowhere trying to prove she matters." Marcus laughed, the sound harsh in the afternoon air. "Yeah, well, she's proven she's nothing special." Sarah's fingers paused on her laces for just a moment. Then she continued tying, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was securing something deep inside herself. The equipment depot was another opportunity for humiliation. Recruits lined up to receive gear for the next exercise, and the quartermaster, a gruff older man named Thompson, handed out vests and helmets with barely concealed contempt for the young recruits. When Sarah stepped up, he looked her over like she was something unpleasant he'd discovered on his boot. "What's this, a homeless shelter?" he said, loud enough for the entire line to hear. "We don't have gear for civilians, sweetheart." He tossed her a tactical vest that was at least 3 sizes too large, the straps hanging uselessly. The recruits behind her snickered. "Maybe she can use it as a sleeping bag," one called out. Sarah caught the vest, her fingers tightening around the fabric for just a moment. She didn't argue, didn't request a replacement. She just slung it over her shoulder and walked out, her shoes echoing on the concrete floor. Thompson laughed and shook his head. "That one's going to quit by tomorrow," he announced to the room. But outside, away from watching eyes, Sarah adjusted the oversized vest with a few quick tactical knots, transforming it into a perfect fit. Her hands moved with the same precision she'd shown with the rifle, like equipment modification was second nature. The mountain run the next morning was designed to be punishing. 8 miles over brutal terrain, full gear, no mercy. Sarah stayed in the middle of the pack, her breathing even and controlled, her steps steady despite the grueling pace. Victoria was right behind her, muttering complaints the entire time. "Speed it up, welfare case," she hissed through gritted teeth. "You're slowing us down." At the halfway point, when exhaustion was beginning to show on faces and form was deteriorating, Victoria made her move. She nudged Sarah's shoulder just enough to throw her off balance. Sarah's foot caught on a loose rock and she veered off the designated path, her knee twisting as she hit the uneven ground. Sergeant Major Thompson saw it happen. "Chen!" he roared, his voice carrying across the entire formation. "Broke formation. Squad loses points." The group groaned, some shooting angry looks in Sarah's direction. Marcus turned around, his face flushed with exertion and anger. "Nice work, Chen. Real team player." Sarah didn't argue, didn't try to explain what had really happened. She simply got back in formation, her jaw tight, and kept running. If the twisted knee was bothering her, her slight favor was barely noticeable. When the run finally ended, Thompson pointed directly at her. 5 extra laps. Move." The others watched, some smirking as Sarah started running again. Her breath came in short gasps now, her face slick with sweat, but she completed every lap without complaint. When she finally finished, hands on knees, gulping air, no one offered her water. Victoria tossed an empty bottle at her feet. "Hydrate with air," she said, laughing at her own cruelty. Sarah picked up the bottle, crushed it slowly in her hand, and dropped it in the recycling bin. She didn't make a sound. During a night exercise designed to simulate combat conditions, recruits were tasked with establishing a defensive perimeter under simulated enemy fire. Flares illuminated the sky and instructors shouted contradictory orders, creating controlled chaos. Sarah worked alone, securing a communication line with steady hands while explosions echoed around them. Trevor Walsh, stocky and loud, decided she made an easy target for some evening entertainment. He grabbed her line and yanked it free, tossing it into the mud with exaggerated carelessness. "Oops," he said, grinning at his buddies. "Guess you're not cut out for this, huh?" The others nearby laughed, their flashlights bobbing as they watched the show. Sarah knelt in the mud, picked up the line, and started over, her fingers working methodically, each connection precise despite the chaos around them. Trevor wasn't finished. He kicked dirt onto her hands, coating the line in grime. "Keep trying, princess," he said. "Maybe you'll get it done by sunrise." The group roared with laughter, but Sarah paused, her hands going still, and looked up at him. Her voice was quiet, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "You done?" Trevor blinked, thrown off by the quiet intensity in her gaze, but he laughed it off and walked away. Sarah went back to work, her face unreadable, and had the communication line clean and secure in moments. Later, when the exercise ended and scores were calculated, Trevor discovered his own line had come loose during the drill, costing his squad valuable points. No one had seen Sarah anywhere near his section, but Maria, watching from the sidelines, allowed herself a small smile. Watching Sarah endure this treatment while quietly demonstrating skills that made veteran instructors take notice. What would you have done in her place? Would you have remained silent or revealed your true capabilities? Comment below and share your thoughts because your perspective matters just as much as what's unfolding in this story. Now, here's where things took a dramatic turn that no one anticipated. That night in the barracks, Sarah sat on her narrow cot, pulling an old photograph from her bag. It was creased and worn at the edges, showing a younger version of herself standing next to a woman in a black combat uniform. The woman's face was deliberately obscured in the photo, but her stance, shoulders back, eyes alert, carried an unmistakable weight of authority and danger. She traced her finger over the photograph, her lips pressing together in what might have been remembrance or regret, then quickly tucked it away when she heard approaching footsteps. Marcus walked by, tossing his towel over his shoulder with casual arrogance. "Better sleep tight, Chen," he said, not bothering to look at her. "Tomorrow's the marksmanship test. Try not to embarrass yourself more than you already have." Sarah didn't respond. She lay back on the thin mattress, hands behind her head, staring at the ceiling. Her breathing was slow and even, but her eyes remained open long after the lights went out. The precision shooting examination was designed to be a make-or-break moment. 5 shots at 500 meters. 5 perfect bullseyes required or immediate dismissal from the program. The pressure was intentional and brutal. The recruits lined up at the firing range, nervous energy crackling through the group. They fiddled with their scopes, whispered anxiously about wind speed and atmospheric conditions, their confidence from earlier drills nowhere to be found. Victoria went first, her platinum blonde hair whipping in the breeze. She missed 3 shots completely, her face pale as chalk when she stepped back from the firing line. Marcus managed to hit 3 targets, cursing under his breath at the misses that might cost him his standing in the program. Then it was Sarah's turn. Victoria whispered to the recruit next to her, her voice carrying just far enough. Bet she can't even hold the rifle properly. During the precision rifle exercise, Sarah utilized professional-grade shooting equipment, including advanced optical targeting systems and specialized ammunition designed for extreme accuracy requirements. The military specification scope she adjusted featured laser rangefinding capabilities and ballistic calculation technology that enabled perfect shot placement even with the deliberately misaligned rifle sights that would have caused most marksmen to miss their targets completely. Sarah settled into position behind the rifle. Her movements calm and almost mechanical. She didn't spend time adjusting the scope, didn't take practice aims or test the wind. She simply aimed, breathed, and fired. 5 shots, 5 perfect hits dead center. No hesitation between shots, no scope adjustments, no visible effort, just cold mechanical precision that left everyone staring in stunned silence. The range officer blinked at the target display, then at Sarah, then back at the display like his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Chen," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. "Perfect score." A general who had been observing from a distance, an older woman with steel-gray hair and a chest full of ribbons, leaned forward with sudden interest. "Who trained her?" she murmured to her aide, her voice barely audible, but somehow urgent. The aide shook his head. "No information in her file, sir. But that trigger control, that's not civilian training." Marcus overheard and rolled his eyes dramatically. "Lucky shots," he announced loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Let's see her do something that actually matters." But during the mandatory equipment check that followed the shooting exercise, the range officer discovered something that made his blood run cold. Sarah's rifle had a misaligned sight. A defect so subtle that no one else had noticed it, but significant enough that it should have made accurate shooting impossible. She'd compensated for the defect perfectly, adjusting her aim by muscle memory and instinct alone. The officer shook his head, muttering to himself, "That's not luck. That's pure skill." The mess hall incident the next evening was the culmination of days of building tension. Sarah had been last in the chow line, and by the time she reached the serving area, the food had run out. She sat at her usual corner table anyway, sipping water, her face calm despite her empty tray. A group of recruits led by Ashley Walsh, tall, smug, with a laugh that carried like fingernails on a chalkboard, spotted this opportunity for entertainment. Ashley walked over and deliberately dropped a half-eaten sandwich onto Sarah's empty tray. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with theatrical pity. "Can't have you starving, right? You need your strength for, what exactly? Carrying our bags." The table behind her burst into laughter. Cameras came out again, recording what they thought would be another humiliation for their social media feeds. Sarah looked at the sandwich, then at Ashley, her eyes steady and unflinching. "Thanks," she said simply, picking it up and taking a slow, deliberate bite. Ashley's smile faltered. She'd expected tears, anger, some kind of reaction she could mock. Instead, she got this unnerving calm that made her feel like she was missing something important. The group kept laughing, but it sounded forced now, uncertain. Sarah finished the entire sandwich, then set her tray aside and stood to leave. As she brushed past Ashley, her shoulder made the slightest contact, just enough to make the taller woman step back involuntarily. For a moment, the mess hall went quiet, everyone watching this small woman who'd somehow made herself the center of attention without saying a word. The combat simulation was scheduled for the following morning, and it would prove to be the test that changed everything. Hand-to-hand combat, one-on-one matches, no weapons, no mercy, pure skill against skill. When the pairings were announced, fate or cruel irony paired Sarah against Marcus Sterling, 6 feet 2 inches of muscle, ego, and barely contained aggression. He towered over her small frame, his fists already clenched, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Before the whistle even blew to start the match, Marcus charged forward like a bull, grabbing Sarah's collar with both hands and slamming her back against the padded wall of the training area. The impact was violent enough that her jacket tore, the fabric ripping from her shoulder partway down her back. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Sarah looked genuinely vulnerable, pinned against the wall by someone twice her size. The squad burst into cruel laughter. "Look at that," Victoria jeered, her phone out and recording. "She's got tattoos, too. What is this? Some kind of gang member?" But as Marcus leaned in closer, his face inches from hers, preparing to deliver what he thought would be the final humiliation, something in Sarah's eyes made him pause. There was no fear there, no panic, just a cold, calculating patience that he didn't understand. "This isn't summer camp, Chen," he snarled, trying to regain his momentum. "This is a battlefield. Time to go home, little girl." Sarah looked directly into his eyes, her voice steady and quiet. "Let go." Marcus laughed, but his grip loosened just slightly, whether from overconfidence or some subconscious recognition that he was making a terrible mistake. That small loosening was all Sarah needed. She stepped back and the torn jacket fell lower, revealing more of what lay beneath. And that's when everything changed. The torn fabric fell away, and suddenly, the entire training yard went silent. Etched across Sarah's shoulder blade in stark crimson ink that seemed to glow in the morning light was a tattoo unlike anything the recruits had ever seen. A phoenix rising from flames, rendered in intricate detail. Its wings were spread wide, and its talons gripped what looked like a broken chain. The flames beneath were so realistic they seemed to dance on her skin. But it wasn't just the craftsmanship that made everyone freeze. It was the symbol itself. The laughter died in throats. Phones stopped recording. Even Marcus loosened his grip, his predatory grin fading as he stared at the mark on her skin. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Victoria's voice cracked slightly, the cruel confidence wavering. But General Patricia Sullivan, who had been observing the training exercises from across the yard, stepped forward with movements sharp and deliberate. Her weathered face had gone completely pale, and her hands were trembling, actually trembling as she approached. "Who gave you the right to wear that mark?" she asked, her voice shaking with something between reverence and terror. The entire training ground seemed to hold its breath. Even the instructors had stopped what they were doing, sensing that something monumental was happening. Sarah stood there, her back straight despite Marcus still gripping her torn jacket, the tattoo stark against her skin. She looked directly at the general, her voice quiet but clear enough to carry across the silent yard. "I didn't ask for it," she said. "It was given to me by Red Phoenix herself. I trained under her for 7 years." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. General Sullivan froze completely, her eyes widening in recognition and disbelief. Then, as if her body was moving without conscious thought, she straightened to attention and snapped her hand to her forehead in a perfect salute. The other officers stared, mouths agape. An aide nearby whispered urgently, "Sir, what are you doing?" But Sullivan held the salute, her voice filled with something approaching awe. "No one bears that tattoo unless they're her final student. Her only student." Marcus stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Victoria's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete. Ryan looked like he was about to be sick. The name Red Phoenix was legend in military circles. Whispered stories of a unit that didn't officially exist. Missions that never happened. Operatives who vanished from records after completing impossible tasks. 6 years ago, the entire unit had been declared Kia in a classified operation that was so secret most people weren't even sure it had actually occurred. Red Phoenix herself was mythical, a trainer so elite that she supposedly selected only one student per decade, marking them with this tattoo as proof of their lethal capabilities. Most people assumed it was just another military urban legend. Looking at General Sullivan's reaction, it was clear the legend was very real. An aide leaned close to the general, his voice urgent. "Sir, Red Phoenix was classified as—" "I know what she was classified as," Sullivan cut him off sharply, never lowering her salute. "I also know what I'm looking at." Sarah acknowledged the salute with a slight nod, then gently but firmly removed Marcus's hands from her jacket. The big man didn't resist. He seemed incapable of movement, staring at her like she'd transformed into something alien. "This is impossible," Victoria whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Maria, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward with a knowing expression. "I wondered why you never fought back," she said quietly. "You weren't hiding because you were weak. You were hiding because you were dangerous." But Marcus's pride wouldn't let him accept what he was seeing. The golden boy who had never lost at anything, who had built his entire identity on being the best, the strongest, the most elite, couldn't process that this small, quiet woman had just revealed herself to be something far beyond his understanding. "Bullshit," he snarled, his voice rising with desperate anger. "I don't care what tattoo you've got or who you claim trained you. Prove it in a real fight." The other recruits looked at each other uncertainly. Even they could sense that Marcus was about to make a catastrophic mistake, but none of them had the courage to stop him. General Sullivan finally lowered her salute, her voice sharp with warning. "Son, I strongly advise you to—" "No," Marcus interrupted, his face red with humiliation and rage. "I'm not going to be intimidated by some ink work and fancy stories. If she's so dangerous, let her prove it." He stepped back into fighting stance, his fists raised, muscles coiled for violence. "Come on, Chen. Show us what the great Red Phoenix taught you." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since arriving at the base, something shifted in her expression. The careful blankness was replaced by something colder, more calculating. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried an edge that made everyone within earshot feel suddenly uncomfortable. "If that's what you want." She didn't bother fixing her torn jacket or adjusting her stance. She simply stood there, arms at her sides, looking almost bored as Marcus circled her like a predator sizing up prey. He charged first, throwing a wild haymaker aimed at her face. Sarah moved just enough to let it whistle past her ear, not even flinching at the near miss. Marcus followed up with a left hook, then a right cross, then a combination that should have overwhelmed her with pure aggression and reach advantage. But Sarah wasn't there when his fists arrived. She moved like water, flowing around his attacks with minimal effort, her footwork so subtle it almost looked like she was standing still while Marcus exhausted himself swinging at empty air. "Hit me already," Marcus roared, his face flushed with exertion and growing desperation. Sarah didn't respond. She let him tire himself out, his swings getting progressively sloppier, his breathing becoming ragged. She was studying him, learning his patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. During the aftermath, Sarah processed the unfolding situation using advanced stress management techniques and specialized psychological protocols originally developed for elite special operations personnel. The comprehensive mental health support systems and evidence-based trauma management methods she'd learned during her classified training enabled her to maintain perfect emotional control even while facing the career-ending consequences of her revealed identity in this high-pressure military environment. When that moment came, it was over so quickly that most of the watching recruits missed it entirely. Marcus threw another wild right hand, overextending himself in his frustration. Sarah stepped inside his guard, her arms sliding around his neck in what looked like an embrace. There was a brief moment where they seemed frozen together, like dancers caught mid-step. Then Marcus's eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. 6 seconds from start to finish. No strikes thrown, no dramatic moves, just a perfectly executed sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain with surgical precision. The training yard was absolutely silent except for the sound of Marcus's body hitting the ground. Sergeant Major Thompson walked over, his face unreadable as he looked down at Marcus's unconscious form, then at Sarah, then at the assembled group of shell-shocked recruits. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the yard with absolute authority. Effective immediately, he announced, Sarah Chen is designated as an honorary instructor. You will learn from her, you will respect her, and you will follow her orders as you would mine. Sarah didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the promotion at all. She simply picked up her duffel bag, pulled her torn jacket closed as best she could, and began walking toward the barracks. The recruits parted before her like she was carrying something contagious, their eyes down, their earlier laughter completely forgotten. The transformation in the camp's atmosphere was immediate and profound. Word of what had happened spread through the base faster than wildfire, carried by whispered conversations and hastily shared cell phone videos. By evening, everyone from the kitchen staff to the commanding officers knew that the quiet woman they'd been dismissing as a charity case was actually something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. The live fire exercise scheduled for the next day provided Sarah with her first opportunity to lead a team. Her group included Victoria, who rolled her eyes at the assignment but didn't dare voice her objections out loud anymore. As they moved through the mock urban assault course, Victoria deliberately ignored Sarah's hand signals, rushing ahead and triggering a proximity alarm that set off a deafening siren. The exercise came to an immediate halt, and Sergeant Major Thompson stormed over, his face red with anger. Chen, he bellowed. Your team's a disaster. Victoria smirked, whispering to Ryan loud enough for others to hear. Told you she's useless. Tattoo doesn't make you a leader. Sarah stood there, her hands steady at her sides, and spoke calmly. Victoria broke formation. I signaled her to wait. She ignored the signal. Thompson turned to Victoria, who shrugged with theatrical innocence. I didn't see any signal, she lied smoothly. The group snickered, ready to blame Sarah for the failure, despite what they had witnessed the day before. Old habits died hard, and there was comfort in returning to familiar patterns of scorn. Sarah didn't argue. She simply nodded and said, Understood, sir. But as they reset for another attempt, someone had the presence of mind to check the overhead drone footage that recorded all training exercises. The replay showed Victoria deliberately ignoring Sarah's clear hand signals, her head turned away in obvious defiance. Sergeant Major Thompson watched the footage, his jaw tightening with each second of evidence. When it finished, he docked Victoria's squad 75 points and assigned her to kitchen duty for a week. The group's laughter died instantly, and Victoria's face went pale as she realized her lie had been exposed to everyone present. The change in Sergeant Major Thompson himself was perhaps the most noticeable transformation. The man who had dismissed Sarah as maintenance crew on her first day now watched her with careful attention, his harsh commands replaced by respectful requests. During briefings, he would actually pause to ask her opinion, something he'd never done with any other recruit in his 25-year career. It wasn't just respect. It was the recognition that he was in the presence of someone whose training and experience far exceeded his own, despite her deliberate attempts to hide it. 2 days later, during a break in the afternoon training schedule, a young officer approached Sarah as she sat alone cleaning her gear. He was nervous, clutching a tablet to his chest, his uniform crisp, but his face betraying anxiety. Ma'am, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's someone here to see you. Sarah looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. Who? I can't say, ma'am. She's waiting at the main gate. She followed him through the base, past groups of recruits who now watched her with mixtures of fear and fascination. The walk to the entrance felt longer than it should have, filled with tension that seemed to build with each step. At the gate, a woman stood waiting. She was tall and lean with military short hair that was silver at the temples. She wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, and a black leather jacket that looked deceptively casual but screamed expensive and functional to anyone who knew what to look for. When she moved, it was with the controlled precision of someone who had spent decades in combat zones. The base guard had stepped back respectfully, clearly uncomfortable with whatever authority this woman carried. General Sullivan was there too, standing at attention with her hands clasped behind her back. When she saw Sarah approach, she cleared her throat. "Chen," she said formally. "This is Admiral Rebecca Stone." The woman in the black jacket looked at Sarah, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the base, her carefully controlled expression cracked. Something passed between them. Recognition, relief, perhaps even love. She walked up to her, stopping just a few feet away. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice softer than anyone had heard it since her arrival. Admiral Stone tilted her head, and the corner of her mouth quirked up in what might have been a smile. "Yeah," she said simply. "I did." The recruits watching from a distance went completely silent. Victoria, standing near the fence, dropped her water bottle. The plastic clattered on the concrete, but no one moved to pick it up. General Sullivan cleared her throat, addressing the gathered crowd in a voice that carried clear across the courtyard. "This is Admiral Rebecca Stone," she announced, pausing for effect. "Sarah's wife." The words hit like a shockwave. Victoria actually staggered backward. Ryan's mouth fell open. Even Maria, who had suspected Sarah was more than she appeared, looked stunned by this revelation. Admiral Stone didn't elaborate or explain. She simply placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, the same shoulder that bore the Crimson Phoenix tattoo, and they walked together toward her rusted sedan. The engine roared to life with a sound that seemed far too powerful for such an old vehicle, and they drove off, dust kicking up behind them in a cloud that obscured them from view. No one moved until the car had disappeared completely down the access road. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Marcus, who had been transferred to the medical facility after his encounter with Sarah, found himself facing a full military review board within 48 hours. His attack on what was now known to be a classified operative was deemed conduct unbecoming of a military officer. He was discharged within the week, his dreams of Special Forces glory ending with a dishonorable mark on his permanent record. His family name, once respected in military circles, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and assumptions. Victoria's troubles were more public and arguably more devastating. The video of her taunting Sarah, recorded by her own friends and posted to social media, went viral within hours of the revelation about Sarah's true identity. The defense contractor that had been sponsoring her training pulled their support immediately, releasing a statement about values incompatible with our corporate mission. Her social media accounts, once filled with admiring followers, became battlegrounds of criticism and outrage. She deleted her accounts within days, but the internet doesn't forget, and screenshots lived on across countless platforms. Ryan found himself reassigned to the worst duties the base had to offer. Kitchen patrol, latrine cleaning, equipment maintenance in the desert heat. Every unpleasant task that needed doing somehow found its way to his schedule. When he tried to complain, he was curtly reminded that his behavior toward a decorated veteran was a matter of permanent record. Sergeant Major Thompson faced his own reckoning. A quiet meeting with base leadership resulted in mandatory retraining on leadership principles and respect for personnel, regardless of appearance or background. His formerly harsh demeanor was replaced by something more thoughtful, more careful. The man who had once dismissed Sarah as maintenance crew now questioned every assumption he made about the people under his command. But perhaps the most significant change was in the base's culture itself. The story of Sarah Chen became required reading for new recruits, a stark lesson about the dangers of judging people by their appearance. Training protocols were revised to emphasize respect and inclusion, with severe penalties for harassment or discrimination. Maria found herself in an unexpected position of influence. Her early kindness to Sarah when everyone else had shown cruelty earned her recognition from the command structure. She was selected for advanced training programs and found mentors eager to support someone who had demonstrated the wisdom to see past surface appearances. During a final review of the recruit program 3 weeks later, the base's top brass gathered to evaluate the training cycle's outcomes. Sarah's name inevitably came up, and the room fell silent. A junior officer, recently transferred and unaware of the full story, suggested that her abrupt departure indicated a lack of commitment to the program. General Sullivan leaned forward, her voice deadly quiet. "Chen's file is classified above your clearance level," she said. "But I'll tell you this, She's the only person who's ever walked through those gates who could have run this entire base blindfolded while half asleep. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope marked with official stamps and a crimson phoenix emblem. She slid it across the conference table. Her training evaluations from Red Phoenix herself, Sullivan continued. Read them if you want to understand what real excellence looks like. Then tell me again who's lacking commitment. The junior officer opened the envelope with trembling hands. His face went progressively paler as he read, his eyes widening with each line of text. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully and didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. Meanwhile, Sarah and Admiral Stone had disappeared as completely as if they'd never existed. Some reports placed them at a remote training facility in Alaska running advanced programs for special operations candidates. Others suggested they were overseas, part of a classified unit that didn't appear on any official rosters. But in the barracks where she'd once slept, recruits still found reminders of her presence. A young recruit named Alex discovered an old photo tucked under one of the bunks, the same creased image she'd looked at that night, showing her younger self standing next to a woman whose face was deliberately blurred. Alex held it up to the light, squinting at the mysterious figure in the black uniform. Who was she really? He asked his bunkmates. No one answered directly, but Maria, who had transferred to advanced training but occasionally visited to share her experience with newer recruits, looked at the photo thoughtfully. She was exactly who she appeared to be, Maria said finally. Someone who didn't need to prove herself to anyone. The question isn't who she was. It's whether we're smart enough to recognize that kind of strength when we see it again. The photo made its way from recruit to recruit, becoming something of a talisman. New recruits would study it, trying to understand how someone so ordinary-looking could have hidden such extraordinary capabilities. It became part of the base's folklore, a visual reminder that true strength rarely announces itself. 6 months later, the consequences were still rippling outward. The defense contractor that had dropped Victoria faced ongoing public relations challenges as social media users continued to share the story of the unassuming woman who had proven herself superior to their elite candidate. Their stock price never fully recovered from the viral backlash. Marcus's discharge became a case study in military academies used to teach future officers about the importance of humility and respect. His name was scrubbed from commendation lists and honor rolls, his achievements overshadowed by his spectacular failure of judgment. The base itself became something of a pilgrimage site for military personnel who had heard the story. Visitors would ask to see the training yard where the confrontation had occurred, the mess hall where Sarah had endured the bullying, the barracks where she had quietly prepared for each day's challenges. But Sarah Chen herself remained a ghost, her true whereabouts known only to the highest levels of military command. Occasionally, reports would surface of a small, unassuming woman appearing at training facilities around the world, observing exercises, offering quiet corrections to techniques, then disappearing before anyone could confirm her identity. Admiral Stone, when asked by her peers about her wife's current activities, would smile enigmatically and change the subject. But those who knew her well noticed changes in her demeanor, a relaxation of tension, a satisfaction that suggested someone who had found peace after years of searching. The story spread beyond military circles, becoming popular on social media platforms and inspiring countless discussions about hidden potential, the danger of assumptions, and the quiet strength of those who choose service over self-promotion. Hashtags like #NeverJudge and #QuietStrength trended for weeks. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the individuals who had witnessed Sarah's transformation from target to legend. Each of them carried the memory of that moment when the torn jacket revealed not just a tattoo, but a complete reversal of everything they thought they understood about power, respect, and true capability. Years later, they would tell the story to their own subordinates, their children, anyone who would listen, not as a tale of revenge or comeuppance, but as a reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one nobody notices. The training facility continued to operate, but it was forever changed by the woman who had arrived in a rusted sedan and left in the passenger seat of the same vehicle, having proven that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the one you never intended to make at all. As winter settled over the base, bringing colder temperatures and new cycles of training, old-timers would sometimes point out the corner table where Sarah had sat alone, the patch of ground where Marcus had fallen unconscious, the spot where General Sullivan had offered her unprecedented salute. These places became unofficial monuments to the idea that strength doesn't always announce itself, that true power often wears the humblest disguise, and that the people we dismiss as insignificant might just be the most significant of all. But the story wasn't quite over. On a quiet evening in December, 8 months after Sarah had driven away with Admiral Stone, an encrypted phone rang in a secure facility 3,000 miles away. The woman who answered it looked remarkably like the maintenance worker who had once endured harassment at a Special Forces training base, but her eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there before. The voice on the other end spoke a single phrase. Code Crimson. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Crimson had been Red Phoenix's final operation, the one that had supposedly killed her and scattered her organization to the winds. If someone was using that code name, it meant the past she thought she'd buried was clawing its way back to the surface. I thought Crimson was terminated, she said carefully. So did we, the voice replied. But we just intercepted communications that suggest otherwise. The target from the original mission. She's alive, and she knows about you. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She looked across the room at Admiral Stone, who was reading classified reports by lamplight. Stone glanced up, saw her expression, and immediately understood that their brief period of peace was ending. When? She asked into the phone. 72 hours. The usual place. The line went dead. Stone set down her papers and walked over to her, her expression grave but unsurprised. They had both known this moment would come eventually. The kind of enemies Red Phoenix had made didn't simply disappear because convenient paperwork declared them dead. How long? Stone asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. Maybe weeks, maybe longer. Stone nodded, accepting what she'd always known would happen eventually. I'll make the arrangements. As Sarah began preparing for what would undoubtedly be her most dangerous mission yet, she thought about the recruits she'd left behind at the training base. They were probably graduating now, receiving their assignments, beginning the careers that would define the rest of their lives. Some of them had learned the lesson she'd tried to teach through her example. Others, perhaps, were still waiting for their own moment of reckoning when life would force them to confront the difference between what they thought they knew and what was actually true. The phone rang again. This time, the voice was different, younger, more urgent. Chen, this is Agent David Park, Defense Intelligence Agency. We have a situation that requires your specific skill set. I'm listening. 4 of our deep cover operatives have gone missing in Southeast Asia. Before they disappeared, they managed to transmit a single word, Phoenix. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. If Red Phoenix was alive, if she was operating in the shadows again, then everything she thought she'd left behind was about to become very real, very quickly. I need 72 hours to wrap up here, she said. You have 48. This can't wait. The line went dead, leaving Sarah standing in the quiet room with Admiral Stone, both of them understanding that the woman who had once hidden her identity as a maintenance worker was about to step back into a world where such deceptions were matters of life and death. She walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful landscape, knowing it might be the last moment of tranquility she would have for a very long time. The past never stays buried, does it? She murmured. Stone joined her at the window, her hand finding hers. No, she said quietly. But maybe that's not always a bad thing. Maybe some ghosts are meant to be faced. As night settled over their temporary sanctuary, Sarah Chen began the mental preparation for returning to a world she'd tried to leave behind. The process was as methodical as everything else she did, a careful inventory of skills that had lain dormant, a review of protocols she'd hoped never to use again, and the gradual shuttering of the peaceful life she'd built with Stone in the months since leaving the training base. She moved through their small cabin with quiet efficiency, her hands automatically reaching for equipment that had been stored in hidden compartments throughout their home. False identities, encrypted communication devices, weapons that had been cleaned and maintained despite her hope that they would never be needed again. Each item she touched brought back memories of missions that officially never happened, of people who had depended on her ability to become invisible until the moment when invisibility was no longer an option. Stone watched her prepare, understanding that the woman she'd married was transforming before her eyes into something harder, more dangerous. The gentle softening that had come with civilian life was melting away, replaced by the cold professionalism that had made her Red Phoenix's most trusted protégé. It was like watching someone put on armor piece by piece until the vulnerable human beneath was completely protected by layers of lethal competence. The phone calls had been brief, professional, stripped of emotion. But Sarah knew that behind those clinical exchanges lay a web of international crisis that required someone with her unique combination of skills. The ability to hide in plain sight, to be dismissed and underestimated until the moment when such underestimation became a weapon more deadly than any blade or bullet. She thought about the training base, about the recruits who were probably preparing for their final evaluations. Even now, they had learned to see past appearances. At least some of them had. Maria would carry that lesson with her throughout her career, becoming the kind of leader who looked deeper than surface impressions. Others, like Ryan and Victoria, had learned harder truths about the consequences of cruelty and assumption. But there would be new recruits arriving soon, fresh faces filled with the same arrogance and prejudices that had initially greeted her. The cycle would repeat itself as it always did, until someone came along to shatter their preconceptions once again. She hoped that when that moment arrived, there would be people like Maria to bridge the gap between mockery and understanding. The quiet woman who had once endured humiliation rather than reveal her true capabilities was about to step back into the shadows where such capabilities were not just useful but essential for survival. The transformation wasn't just professional. It was psychological. A return to a mindset where trust was earned through actions, not words, and where the ability to appear harmless was often the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In the classified briefings that would follow, analysts would describe her as a high-value asset with unique operational characteristics. They would enumerate her skills, her success rate, her psychological profile, but they would miss the most important element, the hard-won wisdom that came from understanding what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, considered irrelevant. That experience at the training base hadn't just been an unfortunate chapter in her life. It had been a masterclass in human nature. A reminder of how quickly people revealed their true character when they believed themselves to be in positions of power over those they considered inferior. Such knowledge was invaluable in her line of work, where understanding human weakness was often more important than physical strength or technical skill. The recruits at the training base would never know how their story had ended, or rather how it had begun all over again. They would continue their careers, some rising to positions of leadership, others finding their own paths through the complex world of military service, but each of them would carry some piece of her lesson with them, whether they realized it or not. In moments when they were tempted to dismiss someone based on appearance or background, perhaps they would remember the quiet woman with the torn jacket and the crimson phoenix tattoo. But somewhere in the classified files of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a new operation was taking shape. One that would require someone with the patience to endure mockery, the strength to remain silent under pressure, and the lethal skills that came with bearing the mark of the Red Phoenix. The missions would be different, the stakes higher, the enemies more sophisticated than the bullies she'd faced at the training base. But the fundamental challenge would remain the same: how to use others' assumptions about weakness and insignificance as weapons against them. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very qualities that had made her a target for harassment, her small stature, her quiet demeanor, her unremarkable appearance, were precisely what made her invaluable as an operative. In a world where everyone expected danger to look intimidating, someone who looked like she belonged behind a service counter or in a maintenance uniform could move through spaces that would be impossible for more obvious threats to penetrate. As she packed the last of her specialized equipment, Sarah reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought her from the daughter of military privilege to the student of a legendary ghost, and finally to a woman who could choose when to be invisible and when to reveal the steel beneath the surface. Each identity had taught her something essential, but it was the combination of all of them that made her uniquely suited for the challenges ahead. The world beyond their sanctuary was dangerous in ways that civilians could never fully comprehend. It was populated by people who used violence as a language, who treated human life as a commodity, who believed that power came from the ability to instill fear. Against such enemies, the conventional tools of warfare were often inadequate. What was needed was something more subtle, more unexpected. Someone who could walk into their midst unnoticed and unrecognized until it was far too late for them to mount any defense. Sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought by the people no one expects to fight them at all. And sometimes the woman everyone underestimated turns out to be exactly the person the world needs most. But such women remain hidden until the crucial moment when the world's very survival depends on their quiet, lethal grace.